Good morning. You all made it here in this cold, frigid morning. I was delighted to come in my new car with heated car seats. It's perfect for this weather. I'm delighted to be here and delighted that the heat is working inside this building. I understand there's been some problems next door, as there have in many houses and buildings in the last few weeks because of the cold. But it's good to be here. It's good to be in God's house and good to be with you all. My name is Scott Slater. I serve on the bishop's staff as Canon to the Ordinary. So I bring greetings from Bishop Sutton and from Bishop Knudsen and the rest of the diocesan staff to thank you for being part of the Diocese of Maryland and the Episcopal Church, what our presiding bishop calls our branch of the Jesus movement. So thank you for moving here this morning to be with us and to be with God in this place as the Christian community gathered. Now, all that said, I want to say something to begin this sermon, so I want you to listen carefully. Be suspicious of what you think you know. Trust the promises. Be suspicious of the things that you think you know, and trust the promises. Trust is a tricky thing. We sometimes equate the word trust with faith. They are very similar. And faith is a word, of course, that we embrace in our Christian heritage. But trust is something we cannot survive without. We have to grow up, even as babies, learning to trust others. But trust is a tricky thing. I don't mean just faith in God either. We have to trust other people, beginning with our parents and teachers and other significant people in our life. Eventually, we have to trust even strangers, such as doctors and first responders. We trust objects like our cars to be dependable and safe and trustworthy. We even trust things like chairs. So you saw me bring this chair up and place it at the front of the chancel. I want you to imagine for a moment that there are two chairs up here. This is a chair that belongs to your church. It was sitting right next to me. I brought it forward, and as far as I know, I've never sat in this chair. Now imagine that if I had brought a chair from my house, a dining room chair, that I had set the dining room chair next to this chair that I've never sat in. Which chair do you think I would trust more? Which of you would guess that the chair from my home? You're wrong. So if I brought the dining room chair I was thinking of, I know from experience that dining chair is broken. I have more faith in this chair that I've never sat in than I do in a chair that I have, because I have had experience with one of the chairs and know not to trust it. I don't have any reason not to trust this one. I wouldn't believe that any of you would have a chair up here that would collapse if a person sat in it. Otherwise, you would have removed it. So I'm trusting this chair based on you all, but it's blind trust. I don't have any reason to trust this chair other than my faith in you all. So that's why I choose to trust in this particular chair rather than my own chair. So to think of it another way, I want you to imagine being a scene in which, not today outside, but in a warmer day and age, a father and a young child at the edge of a swimming pool. And the father is inside the swimming pool, waist deep, trying to coax the young child to jump into the swimming pool, to experience life of swimming. And the father standing there in the water saying, come on, you can do it. And you can picture the child standing there on the edge, tentative, a little nervous about jumping and not sure what he or she is going to experience. The faith of the child in the father is what eventually helps the child to trust by jumping into the water. Now, Samuel, in our first lesson, struggled with the tension between suspicion and trust. Samuel, we hear time and time again in the night, hears God calling out to him. And at first he's suspicious of that voice, as it's an unfamiliar voice in that context. He's not sure what the context means or what the voice is intending. And so finally, Samuel kind of figures out it must not be a dream, it must be the voice of Eli, his mentor, even though it doesn't necessarily sound like Eli's voice. So Samuel goes in and keeps talking to Eli, and Eli's like, go back to bed, it's probably just a dream. Finally, Eli recognizes that something different is going on, so Eli suspects that perhaps God is speaking to Samuel. And Eli's suspicion turns to trust. And so Eli guides Samuel to go back and ask a different question the next time it happens. And so Samuel, in that context, finally moves from suspicion to faith and listens to God. And what God has to say to Samuel is disturbing. God has harsh words about Eli and about Eli's descendants. And God chooses Samuel, this young boy, to convey that message to his mentor. Now imagine what that was like for Samuel to have to say that news to his mentor. A little bit like being that little child at the edge of the swimming pool, knowing you're being asked by God to jump in, but not sure what's going to happen once you do. So Samuel found himself between a rock and a hard place, not sure what the consequences would come if he did speak or if he didn't speak. And so Samuel had to choose by faith to trust what he was being told, and to trust that it was God speaking to him, and to trust that Eli would hear his words and take them to heart. So we jump ahead to the New Testament story in the gospel of Jesus calling those early followers and having this wonderful story about him calling Nathanael by way of Philip. And the disciple Nathanael was obviously known with some reputation about being suspicious and a little skeptical. He was known as that one in whom there is no deceit. And I think of as somebody being not shy with an opinion, shall we say, and honest with his feelings. And so Nathanael has a bit of a mysterious character. He appears only twice in the Gospels. And many scholars also equate him with Bartholomew, who was listed in the other three Gospels and is one of John the Baptist's followers. And so, at least in the context of John's Gospel, Philip, who is first approached by Jesus, goes to his friend Nathanael and says, "Come and see." And Nathanael initially is a little suspicious, but he trusts not God necessarily, or Jesus, but his friend, Philip. That's where the faith begins in this interaction. And so Nathanael does come, even though he is suspicious that the Messiah could come from, of all places, Nazareth. And Nazareth doesn't mean anything to us necessarily in that context. But Nazareth was one of those towns that nobody wanted to be from. It was the town in the Galilean region that a lot of the other towns like to make fun of. Now, I've lived in 3 major cities, and there's always a suburb or a community in one of those major cities that people tend to look down on. In New Orleans, where I lived for a year, it was the community of Chalmette. Everybody said, "Oh, you don't want to live in Chalmette." In Baltimore, when I first moved here, I was told that one of those communities was Dundalk. So think about it. So you're laughing, so yeah, you see, you've been there. So think of Nazareth as their Dundalk, for good or ill. So Nathanael was a little suspicious. Why would the Messiah come from such a place? Why would God choose such a place to raise up the Savior of the world? And so again, Nathanael goes in with a large amount of suspicion. But he is quickly won over by Jesus because of what Jesus says to him. Jesus says something about seeing him at the fig tree. And we have no idea what that meant. It could be maybe Nathanael was studying the scriptures. Maybe it's just that Jesus was able to say that and have Nathanael know that nobody could have known that except the Messiah. Or it could have been that Jesus was seeing him do something wrong, and he was calling him on it in a way that brought humility and redemption to him. We don't know. The point is, that small interaction with Jesus, that one statement of Jesus's to Nathanael, turned his heart, made him move from a place of suspicion to a place of faith and trust. And then Jesus says to Nathanael, as he said to each of his disciples, "Come, follow me. But be suspicious," and here's my own words being added in. "Nathanael, follow me, and be suspicious of what you think you know, but trust my promise." And we believe, even though we hear nothing more about Nathanael, We believe and we trust that that is indeed what he did. And he went on to be a faithful disciple and follower of Jesus, trusting in the promise of God, but being suspicious of all that he thought he knew before that point in his life of faith. And so again, one of the best models that we have for trust and faith is that of a young child. Not just a young child by the side of a swimming pool, but a child whose faith blossoms from trust built on the relationship of parents and other adults. A faith that has not yet been stained by mistrust and suspicion and cynicism that so many of us grow to embrace as adults, even unwittingly. Children have to place an inordinate amount of trust in the people in their lives that raise them, their parents, godparents, grandparents, other family members. And we know of many instances when trust is broken and abuse does take place, and we know the incredible damage that that can cause in the life of a child. But ideally, children grow up trusting their parents, just as each of us, as a child of God, grows up trusting our heavenly God. In the same way, we are invited by God to then put our whole trust continuously in God's hands. We are always God's children, just as each of us is always the biological child of our parents, even long after our parents perhaps continue to live. We are always God's children. And so God is always there, leading us, calling us forward, asking us to follow him, coaxing us into those uncomfortable places where our faith may lead us to consequences unknown and risk uncertain. One of the things, though, for sure is that God promises to always be there for us and to always take care of us. And even though we're not sure whether we're going to sink or float in those situations, one thing is for certain. God is there to protect us, and God is always there to catch us, no matter what. We may get water up our nose, we may be fearful, but God will always be there to catch us. Now, as a diocesan staff member, I come here today not knowing what the future of All Saints is. That's an unknown. That's an unknown to all of us, because things always are an unknown until they happen in our lives. And I suspect that this moment in your life is an invitation to do things differently, because God often leads us into new places that involve discomfort and risk and trust and faith. And so this is one of your swimming pool moments, perhaps, where God is inviting you to try something new and perhaps something scary. And God promises not only to catch you, but to delight with you when you discover the joy of taking a faithful plunge into God's abiding love, whatever that may mean and whatever that may entail in your near future. And just as Jesus says to Nathanael in today's gospel, he says also to us, come and see. Jump in. Trust me. Trust yourselves. Trust one another. Follow me, and you will see greater things than these. Amen. Amen. Just a test.